How a traumatic childhood can turn a man crazy, how a high IQ can persuade those around you, and how someone so crazy can turn into the co-ed killer. Dun dun dun!
Welcome to Cartoon Killers. Today we're going into the mind of Edmund Kemper III. Edmund Kemper, born December 18, 1948, grew up in Santa Cruz, California with his absent father and alcoholic mother.
Even though Kemper's mom was his main parent, his relationship with his mom was horrible. According to Ed's half-brother, his mother was a complete alcoholic psycho.
When Ed was 8, his mom was so paranoid that Ed was going to sexually assault his sisters that she would lock him in the basement while the rest of the family slept upstairs. Ed's mom was not unreasonably suspicious because growing up he would play electric chair and decapitate cats and his sister's dolls.
My life had started going that way at about 8. At a certain time of the evening, the family left the center room, the living room of the house. My mother and my sisters, or my sisters themselves, would go up to bed upstairs, where I used to go to bed, upstairs. I had to go down to the basement. And an 8-year-old child had a tough time differentiating the reason in that. Why am I going to the basement? I'm going to hell, they're going to heaven.
At age 13, Kemper left home to go live with his father. When his father rejected him, he went to live with his grandparents. He lived with his grandparents for 2 years until 1963, when he got so fed up with his grandmother that he stabbed her to death.
After doing so, he waited outside with a shotgun for his grandfather to come home. Kemper killed his grandfather so he wouldn't have to be sad about his wife's death. 15-year-old Kemper then called the cops and confessed to killing his grandparents and waited to be arrested.
I'm up living with my grandparents in the mountains, and 10 months later I murdered them. It made it worse to be on top of a mountain. I was literally on top of a mountain when it happened. And I sensed everybody in the world just stopping what they were doing, turning around, saw what I did, and are coming to get me. And I knew I was paranoid.
Ed was arrested, he was found to be insane, and was taken to a maximum security mental institution for the criminally insane. This is where he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. While in the institution, there were about 11 doctors compared to 800 patients, so some of the patients had jobs.
Ed Kemper's job allowed him to have access to the hospital records and information. The information allowed him to see what good behavior the doctors were looking for so he could outsmart them. As time went on, Kemper displayed such good behavior that after 5 years, the doctors claimed that he was cured from his schizophrenia, and he was released from the institution in 1968.
He was released to the one person that authorities at the state mental hospital recommended he never see again.
I got paroled to my mother. Atascadero decided that I didn't ever need to talk to her again at all. Don't give her a Christmas present. Leave her alone. She got her pound.
Fun fact! To add to Kemper's hatred of his mom, he did not support the fact that she had been married 3 separate times. In an interview, he said that his mom went through men like a hot knife goes through butter. After being released, Kemper tried to become a state trooper but didn't meet the qualifications because he was too tall at 6 foot 9 inches. He could not get a high-paying job because he only had a high school degree, but he did take some classes at the community college. Instead of being a state trooper, he got a job working on road construction. This was good behavior for Kemper, so his criminal record was expunged. Kemper spent his evenings at a bar hanging out with cops who referred to him as Big Ed. He spent the rest of his day alone with no wife or children. Fun fact! Ever since Kemper was a child, his parents knew he was going to be a big kid since he weighed 13 pounds at birth.
Ed Kemper found his victims at the University of California, Santa Cruz, where his mother had worked and he had a parking pass to. He chose his victims by driving around campus and picking up hitchhikers. He kidnapped and killed 8 people in total. He killed each of them in different ways, but post-mortem he raped, decapitated, and dismembered his victims, dropping them in the surrounding mountains and rivers.
Fun fact!
During one of Ed Kemper's later interviews, he was under quote-unquote truth serum. He revealed that he was also taking part in cannibalism and that he would take some of his victims' legs and turn them into casseroles. Ed Kemper kept up these crimes for about 5 years before he was caught in 1973. Before being caught, he went to his mother's house where he had killed both his mother and her friend Sally. He decapitated both women, and then he cut out his mother's tongue and larynx and put them down the garbage disposal. After this, he then used his mother's head as a dartboard, and then he raped her head.
After he did this, he drove to Colorado and then called the Santa Cruz Police Department from a payphone, explaining his crimes and turning himself in. When he turned himself in, the police thought he was joking until he made one of his cop friends get on the phone so he could tell him exactly where he could find the body of his mother's friend. The police arrested Ed in Colorado while the Santa Cruz police located the bodies.
1 week before I murdered my mother, I said, she's got to die, and I've got to die, or girls like that are going to die. And that's when I decided I'm going to murder my mother. I knew a week before she died I was going to kill her.
While Kemper was in custody of the Colorado police, he confessed to being the co-ed killer. While he then was in custody of the Santa Cruz police, he calmly tells the police about his murders and is very relieved and is eager to tell them about the murders. At the trial, the evidence was all based off of Ed Kemper's confessions and testimony. He knew things only the killer would know, such as body locations and what had specifically happened to each of the bodies. He was charged and convicted to 8 accounts of murders, but at this point, Ed Kemper was determined to be criminally insane. The judge had asked Kemper at the end of the trial what he thought his punishment should be, and he had claimed that he should be sentenced to death by torture. But at this time, California did not allow the death penalty, so he was sentenced to life in prison.
Today, Ed Kemper is still alive in the California Medical Facility State Prison. He had originally been allowed to be on parole for 10 years, but he was taken off and has now been continuously denied to be put back on parole. In prison, he has been known to read and make audiobooks for the blind.
Fun fact! While Ed Kemper has been in prison, he has been able to receive letters. And since about 1990, he has been responding to these letters or fan mail. And according to the prison, he apparently very much enjoys his fame that he has received from these murders.
Ed Kemper used his genius IQ to manipulate the minds of police officers, doctors, and psychiatrists to get away with brutally killing 10 people over the course of 10 years, and only being caught when he turned himself in.